Okay, let's dive right in. We're tackling a situation that can be, well, pretty awkward in today's workplace. When does a friendly gesture, something that's totally normal in one culture, cross the line and become a legal problem? It's a really delicate dance, so let's break down the steps together. So, picture this. A new colleague, maybe from another country, comes up to greet you with a quick kiss on the cheek. What's your gut reaction? Are you thinking, oh, how nice and friendly? Or is your internal alarm going off, wondering if a line was just crossed? That single moment, right there, captures the exact tension we're exploring.
And the reason that question is so tricky is because we're all navigating this giant cultural maze. What feels perfectly normal to one person can feel completely out of place to another. And it all starts with this simple act of saying, hello. Think about it. Our workplaces are total melting pots of different backgrounds, which is amazing. But it also means that a behavior that's totally fine in one culture can be deeply, deeply uncomfortable in another. And that's really where the confusion and the risk begins. A simple greeting can be so incredibly different depending on where you are. You know, here in the US, a firm handshake is the standard. But in some Asian cultures, that can feel way too aggressive. In France, 2 cheek kisses are super common, even in business. And get this, in Belgium, it might even be 3. It's just a whole world of hellos out there, and they're all pretty nuanced. And this really shows you just how different the whole idea of personal space can be. Imagine that nose-touching gesture in a US office. It would feel like a major intrusion, right? But in parts of the Arab world, it can be the absolute greatest sign of trust. It really shows you how deeply our cultural software is programmed. You know, the potential for misunderstandings goes way beyond just greetings. It could be about socializing styles or different views on gender roles. And look at this. In Germany, the discomfort with workplace kissing is so strong that one group actually called for a ban. It's a real minefield of different expectations. So, with all these different and sometimes conflicting cultural norms flying around, how do you know where the real boundary is? Well, here in the United States, there's actually a pretty clear answer: the law. It doesn't matter where you come from, the US workplace has a specific legal standard that applies to everybody. The key legal concept we really need to get our heads around is something called a hostile work environment. Now, the law isn't about outlawing simple teasing or a one-off comment, but when that conduct becomes so frequent or so severe that it makes someone's job just unbearable, that's when it crosses the line from being just annoying to being flat out illegal. Okay, and this right here is the absolute crucial point. U.S. law cares about the impact of the behavior, not the intent behind it. So what the person on the left meant to do doesn't matter nearly as much as how the person on the right felt about it. The big question the law asks is, was the conduct unwelcome from their point of view? That's what really matters in a courtroom. And to make this official, courts use what's called a reasonable victim standard. They basically try to see the situation from the perspective of the person who felt harassed. The whole idea is to avoid reinforcing old, maybe discriminatory norms, and instead really center the experience of the person who was made to feel unsafe or uncomfortable. All right, so how does all this theory actually play out when these cultural clashes land in a courtroom? Let's take a look at what the verdicts can tell us. This brings us to the big legal question. Can you actually defend your actions by saying, hey, it's just my culture? Well, as you can probably guess, that argument has a really tough time in the American legal system. Yeah, the case law on this is super clear. Courts have said again and again that a cultural defense is just not an excuse. They've shown that just because a custom exists, it doesn't give a pass for aggressive behavior. They've also shut down arguments based on stereotypes, reinforcing that there's one universal standard of conduct everyone has to follow at work. So the message from the courts couldn't be clearer. Your cultural background might explain why you acted a certain way, but it doesn't excuse it if it breaks U.S. harassment law. When you're in an American workplace, the law is the final word, period. Okay, so that's the legal stuff. And look, the goal here isn't to scare anyone, it's to empower you. So let's shift gears and talk about some practical, real-world strategies for navigating all this safely and with respect. So what do we do with all this information? How can we interact with each other in a way that feels warm and human, but also keeps things professional and, legally safe for everybody involved? For us as employees, the advice boils down to 3 simple rules. First, just let others take the lead. Watch how people interact and follow their cue. Second, and this is the golden rule, when in doubt, just don't do it. A friendly smile is always, always safe. And third, if a hug or a kiss does happen, keep it strictly professional. Brief, not intrusive, and definitely no lingering.
Of course, this isn't just on the employees. The source material is very clear that employers have a huge role to play here, and for them, the best medicine is always prevention. So the recommendations for employers are all about being proactive. They need to have clear policies and training, create safe ways for people to report issues like a hotline, and maybe most importantly, they need to build a real culture of civility and respect where every single person feels valued. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. As our workplaces get more and more diverse, the challenge is always going to be, how do we honor and respect our colleagues' cultures while also maintaining those clear, universal boundaries that make everyone feel safe and respected? It's pretty much the critical conversation for the modern workplace.